Willow Creek Springs presents Healthy Living with your host, Joe Grumbine.
He recognized that there are other illnesses that have a similar constellation of symptoms. Things like chronic fatigue syndrome, things like West Nile and Lyme, and to a certain extent fibromyalgia, right? And what I tend to be seeing in my reading of the literature, which isn't complete, so it's part like analysis of literature and part instinct of here's what we're going to see next, is in all of these disease states, it's like the top line symptoms are all very similar, right? There's a lot in common. There's overlapping, but not identical.
Right.
Okay. But then I think as you drill down into the mechanism level, physiologically, we're going to see one of two things. I think all of these these other diseases, long COVID, along with things like chronic fatigue syndrome, Lyme disease, West Nile, I think what we're going to end up seeing is they all have a unique molecular level mechanism.
Okay.
But then as that mechanism manifests on a macro scale physiologically in the whole body, that's where you get the similarity in symptoms, where they're all presenting in ways that are similar. To me, what the coin toss is going to be is whether there's a similar like macro level molecular mechanism that they're all using and it's just being triggered in a different way, or whether they all really are completely unique in their mechanisms physiologically of how they cause the disease state. And that's what's not in the
world of
literature
difference
yet.
there.
Right. Well, and that's the question I'm really interested in, because you have to know the answer to that in order to think about designing therapeutics or even natural remedies to actually help people support their recovery and getting through the illness. So, and that's actually kind of the approach I took when I looked at long COVID. I looked at the literature and said, okay, there's not a drug discovery project here yet, right? Not that there won't ever be, but yet.
Right.
So knowing that people with long COVID are really suffering, I kind of went back to the literature and I asked a different question from a different perspective. And I said, well, what do we know enough about to do something right now with? So it wasn't about saying, okay, what's some information that I can use to do the next thing that's a 10-year process. It's what is there out there that can help people kind of right now?
Right. What are we to? Yeah.
Right. Because I'm kind of an action guy. Like I want to give people options, right?
Right.
Let's do something. So that kind of led me to the microclot hypothesis, which is one of the few kind of causative mechanisms that's been postulated of and actually has really good data supporting it of what is a molecular level cause of long COVID. And the microclot hypothesis basically says that long COVID spike protein in the blood binds to a protein called fibrinogen. And fibrinogen is the protein in the blood that actually naturally forms clots. Okay. So the microclot hypothesis for long COVID says that spike protein binds to fibrinogen and in binding causes a change in conformation into an unnatural conformation. And that unnatural conformation tends to polymerize and it forms amyloid, what we call amyloids, which are kind of amorphous, unstructured masses of protein. Most people are familiar with the term amyloid from hearing about it in reference to Alzheimer's. Right. Alzheimer's is thought to be caused by amyloids of A beta and tau protein in the brain, and those plaques are what cause the Alzheimer's. So the microclot hypothesis in long COVID basically says that COVID spike protein catalyzes the formation of amyloids of fibrinogen, this protein, and that's what forms into microclots. And these microclots are sticky, right? And they bind to a bunch of different things. They bind to red blood cells. And in binding to red blood cells and sequestering red blood cells, they reduce diffusion of red blood cells into tissues, and that's what it reduces oxygen delivery. That's what causes fatigue, right?
Okay.
Microclots bind to platelets and cause platelet hyperactivation, which has downstream inflammation and immune response issues, right? This is where you're starting to start seeing propagation of the mechanism beyond just the circulatory system into the cardiac system, into the immune system, and even into the CNS, because platelets are one of the largest internal reservoirs for serotonin.
Okay.
So, and when you activate a platelet, it actually dumps its serotonin. So that's what's leading to serotonin deficiency, which is causing a lot of the CNS effects like depression and anxiety. So microclot hypothesis is a really attractive and elegant hypothesis.
Right. It actually
because
offers an answer that makes some sense.
exactly, right? So, and there's really
Doesn't mean
good
it's right.
data
It just
behind it.
offers an answer that makes some sense.
Exactly. So, and that's the question you always have to ask them. Okay, this is way too convenient. Is it actually what's going on, right? So, and when you dive into the literature on microclot hypothesis, there's been a lot of really good work done on it. There's a lot of good research published in the literature that yes, microclots really do form when you check long COVID patient samples. There's a research laboratory assay you can run to actually visualize microclots in long COVID patients. From what I've read in the literature, basically any long COVID patient that's ever been tested basically has microclots. They haven't really found any patients that don't have them. Now, does that mean they're the causative mechanism for everything?
Right.
Still to be determined. But there's enough data in the literature at the molecular level, which is kind of what I look for, to say, okay, this is actually seems to be what's going on. And you can ask more questions and actually start formulating actions, right? Solutions based on that. And the investigators that published most of the microclot data, they did something really good. They actually took it to the next step and said, okay, can we treat microclots and does that have an impact on long COVID? So they did a small study on about 90 patients with long COVID. They diagnosed them clinically. They met the clinical criteria for long COVID, and then they took them and they measured microclots, and all of them had microclots.
Okay.
And these 90 patients in this study, they gave a pharmaceutical cocktail called triple anticoagulant therapy. So it's 3 anticoagulants together. So they gave them this cocktail, depending on how severe their COVID was, they were on it. The mild COVID patients were on it for 2 to 4 months. The severe COVID patients were on it for 4 to 6 months. All told, in the 90 patients, after they were done taking triple anticoagulant therapy, it had about an 80% rate of recovery for people with long COVID, which is pretty good, right?
I was going to say it. I wouldn't be depressed.
Right?
Numbers. That's pretty great. Yeah.
So, and they did the really good work. They went and they checked the bloods of the patients after they took the therapy, and the ones that recovered didn't have microclots anymore. The ones that recovered did not have microclots anymore. The patients that didn't recover still had them.
Oh, interesting.
So that was a nice kind of wrapping the bow on that
do something with, right? Exactly.
Right. So when I found all of this, I kind of went back to the people with long COVID I knew, and I was like, why aren't you all on this already? Like, what? This is a solution. Why isn't everybody going to the doctor and just getting this? And we can call this done.
Yeah.
And basically, from talking to people, there's 3 problems with triple anticoagulant therapy.
One is you bleed.
That's actually the first one, right? There's a safety issue, right? You're taking 3 anticoagulants together. There's a significant risk of bleeding as a side effect.
Yeah.
And because of that, and because it was a small study and there's not a ton of evidence-based research on it, the physicians are reluctant to prescribe it, right? So there's an access issue that go along with the safety issue. And then the last one is a cost issue, right? Because one of the anticoagulants in the cocktail is super expensive, and insurance doesn't always want to cover it because it hasn't been approved for long COVID.
There you
go.
Go.
So there's a cost issue too. So those three together made it very difficult for people to get any access to triple anticoagulant therapy. So this is where I kind of started going back to my natural products background. I said, well, what people with long COVID really need is a version of triple anticoagulant therapy that is safer,
Right.
which means it's a little bit less potent, right? That is accessible, meaning it's over the counter. You don't need a prescription for it. You don't got to go through a doctor,
Right.
and is affordable, right? So I kind of started thinking about, well, how can we get to that? And then doing what I do and being a medicinal chemist and having had natural products experience, I said, well, the natural method we used to use to discover drugs was you started with the natural product, figured out the mechanism, and then you made the pharmaceutical.
Right.
I said, well, what if I reverse that process? So I took the pharmaceutical cocktail, took each component, looked at the mechanism of action, figured that out, and then for each mechanism of action, found a natural product that had that same mechanism of action.
Sounds reasonable.
So basically, I custom formulated a natural version of triple anticoagulant therapy with components that each match the mechanisms of action of what's in triple anticoagulant therapy.
Nice. And so, when you did this, obviously now you have a whole different set of obstacles, but they're certainly not as rigorous as getting an FDA drug approved. So you now have a lot of, unless of course one of the ingredients that you have is flagged by FDA that says, well, you can't use that, because they randomly do that sometimes.
Yep.
And sometimes they take ingredients that for hundreds of years have been considered safe. They call it grass, generally regarded as safe. And then all of a sudden, magically, when they find a drug use for it, they're like, oh, that's not safe anymore. You can't use it. So, they recently did that with NAC. They've done that with NMN, and then they changed their mind, and all this crazy stuff is always happening in the supplement world. So how did you, jump into that, or how did you navigate that?
So basically what I did in with a natural products background, I actually teach in a natural products course that we actually still make some of the students take, right? So what I did was I kind of amassed a huge list of what people called anticoagulants that were natural products. And I started going one by one as like, okay, let's just knock this out and find all the mechanisms of action. And I did okay for two of the drugs. So in triple anticoagulant therapy, there's apixaban, Eliquis. It's a true anticoagulant, right? It's a factor 10A inhibitor. So I went and found a factor 10A inhibitor. And fortunately, turmeric and the curcumin in turmeric is a factor 10A inhibitor, right? And there's scientific literature documenting that. I was like, okay, golden. So that one was done. The second component in triple anticoagulant therapy is aspirin. Right, it's a dual COX-1, COX-2 inhibitor. Unfortunately, we all know that no natural products, right? White willow bark extract is a natural kind of replacement for aspirin. It also is a COX-1 and 2 inhibitor. So use that as to replace the aspirin. So that's two components. Great. The third one was the one that was a little bit challenging. The pharmaceutical drugs, a drug called clopidogrel, which is a P2Y1, P2Y12 receptor antagonist on platelets. And it inhibits platelet activation. So I had to do a little digging, but I found some really nice, very recent paper in the scientific literature that did a really nice job showing that there's a couple of components in a traditional Chinese medicine extract called Dan Shen. It has two components in it, salvinoic acids A and B, that are antagonists for that receptor. Nice. So that was able to be the replacement, right? So that gave me three natural ingredients, right? Turmeric, mainstream supplement nutraceutical ingredient was going to be any issue with that. Same with white willow bark, and Dan Shen is the same thing. Basically, it's a commonly, I won't say it's a widely used, but it doesn't have a whole lot of regulatory issues. So those were the three things I put in the formulation to replace triple anticoagulant therapy. I threw in some black pepper extract that helps with the bioavailability of the turmeric.
Right.
And knowing that fatigue was such an issue for people with long COVID, I wanted to throw in something specifically to help with that. So
Mhm.
I added some beetroot extract, right,
Okay.
to help with oxygenation, right? The nitrates in there help boost tissue oxygenation, so that would help with the fatigue. And that's those ingredients are basically what I custom formulated into a product I call CircuGuard,
Nice.
right? And this was a different process for me now, right? This was no longer an academic project, right? I'm not
Right,
writing
right.
grants and publishing papers, right? I did all of the research that I did kind of on long COVID and microcloud hypothesis and all the research I did to design the formula. I published on a Substack because it was really important to me for people to be able to check my work, right? I
Hmm.
think that's in this new issue of trust and credibility, I think, having that kind of transparency was really important. So I published
Right,
that
right.
on a Substack. And I ended up I went down the kind of entrepreneurial route, and I formed a company and had the custom formula manufactured, and made it available to people. And so far, the people with long COVID in my audience that have been trying it are getting really good results.
Well, that's fantastic. So, there's a number of, I don't know, challenges that come with working with natural products. I've been working with natural products for
Hmm.
40 years. And I would say that today we both have a much easier job than we did 40
Yeah.
years ago. When I first began this, there was no internet, there was no AI, there was no, if you wanted to learn something, you had to read books.
Yeah.
And that certainly slowed things down. And, of course, when people are developing things, and you think you're onto something good, people protect that information instead of just publishing it out there to see if it's right, because there's,
Hmm.
a lot of money to be made if it works and a lot of risk if it's not. So that's certainly one, challenge that you're now not facing the way, I did when we first got started. And that's pretty powerful, like to be able to go
Yeah.
and reverse look up an active ingredient found within a plant. That's If I would have had that 40 years ago, I'd probably be sitting in a different chair today. And so there's a lot of important information that way. But I think one of the biggest issues, one of the biggest differences between natural um, therapies and solutions and the pharmaceutical or single molecule solutions is just
Hmm.
that every single plant compound, you're identifying curcumin as the active, but turmeric has many
Yeah.
compounds, and in a lot of cases with natural products, natural ingredients, you find that the plant itself has not one molecule that does the job. And it, like you said, you toss a little black pepper in there to make it more bioavailable. Well, there's not an innate logic that would tell you to do that. It's a lot of people's experience in testing and failing and determining that, putting a little catalyst in there makes it work better. Um, so you gotta, wonder. It always ends up coming down to whether it's a pharmaceutical drug or a natural solution. It always really, in the end, comes down to anecdotal evidence.
Yeah.
Even though, we can identify mechanisms and receptors and proteins and peptides and all these things that make things work and not work, in the end, it's way more complicated than we can generally
Yeah.
quantify. And we don't really know for real in the end, most things, most of the time. And so, I mean, I think in some ways that's the good news, because for
Yeah.
people that are willing to get out there a little bit and work with some of these compounds, it's infinite. Nobody's ever going to have all the answers. I don't care
Yeah.
how many supercomputers you put to it. There's just too many variables and too many ways for things to work. And I guess one of my biggest issues, or not issues, but questions or my troubles that we have is there's two paths that we deal with in medical science. One is symptomatic, which we're trying to make these symptoms go away. and the other one is causal. We're trying to make it stop causing the problem.
Yeah.
And the two generally don't have anything to do with each other. So when you determine that, okay, well, this one spike protein is sticking to this stuff and causing these reactions to happen and causing these other things to happen, if we could just get this protein to stop sticking, we would probably not have that problem. But if we would, then go back further, well, why is the protein sticking? Well, this virus keeps replicating and throwing out these parts that cause this thing to happen. Okay, well, then let's go back to that. I mean, so obviously, solving symptomatic problems is way easier than solving causal problems, because it's hard to find these causes a lot of times, especially when the pieces are so small, and even the things that happen. And I'm speaking oversimplistically, so I counter your little scientific approach, and just there's a beauty to both sides of that, and I think that, like, if you can spot the symptomatic or solution, you can probably create a product that you can sell pretty easy, because people want their symptoms to be alleviated or reduced at very least. But man, if we could get into a true cure, I mean, there aren't a lot of cures out there, but there are some. There are some treatments that actually cure a disease. They make it go away and not come back. And I can't help but think that, all of these problems probably have some kind of a cure built inside of them. And I can't help but wonder, like, are we ever going to go down that road? Because it's such a harder road to get to.
So I'm definitely I am very much in favor of always addressing the causative mechanism and not just the symptoms. And I think in most cases, I think there's kind of this sweet spot that's between the root causative mechanism and then just dealing with symptoms. It's like you have to work far enough backwards from the symptoms to address a causative mechanism that deals with a majority of the symptoms. Are you always able to necessarily go all the way back to the exact root cause immediately? Right. That's much more difficult, and eventually, yes, but maybe not immediately. So, like with long
COVID, does it
COVID,
even matter? Like, if you can reduce the symptoms to the point where they don't really cause a problem anymore, who cares? How many people are walking around with viruses that don't really do anything to them?
Well, that depends on whether, if you stop taking the solution for the symptom, whether it comes back, right?
Right.
And that's the whole thing about, are you taking something that will get you to move to a healthier place where you can then taper off of it and not have the symptoms recurring, or are you chronically treating a symptom in perpetuity, right? So in long COVID, it's really thought now that long COVID, the kind of the origin of the mechanism of origin is really viral persistence, where people are so sick, they've got a viral reservoir in them that they're not able to clear. One of the kind of leading hypotheses for where that occurs is it's actually viral infection in the microbiome in the GI tract, and that's why you can't get rid of it, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, if that turned out to be true, what you would want is to come up with something that would get rid of the viral reservoir, and then eventually microclots will stop forming if you get rid of the viral reservoir. Now, I think there's a little bit of a chicken and egg issue there, because obviously in especially when you look at these other conditions that are being termed now as these post-viral reactivation syndromes, things like chronic fatigue syndrome, West Nile Lyme, all of this. The body's not able to fully clear the pathogen naturally, right? So it's almost like you need to intervene in another way to help get the body a little bit healthier to be able to assist in then clearing the pathogen. And that, I think, is one of the advantages of triple anticoagulant therapy, whether it's the pharmaceutical or the natural version, right? Is what triple anticoagulant therapy is actually doing is it's slowing down clotting in the body. So it's slowing down formation of new microclots to allow the body to clear the microclots that are already there. And
Mhm.
I think one of the reasons it probably works is in slowing down new microclot formation, starting to clear some of the microclot load that's there. It's like the body starts getting healthier and
Right.
then is able to help assist in clearing the viral reservoir, which is why on the pharmaceutical version, people have been able to taper off of it and stop taking it.
Nice.
And that's my hope actually for CircuGuard as well. I know people in my audience have been taking it for 3 months, 6 months.
Mhm.
There are people, and what I basically tell people is be prepared to take it for that long, and then you can slowly start tapering off of it. And if your symptoms don't come back, you're good to
Then you're
go,
good. Right.
right? And if they do, it probably means you still have a viral load on board, and you're going to need the CircuGuard can help you be more functional, can help you recover, minimize the symptoms, but they're
Right.
still going to have to do something else to clear the viral load that's
Right.
persisting.
That was where I wanted to get to. I know we're getting kind of
Mhm.
short on time, but I did want to get to, how long has this product been out? And, it's kind of an amazing thing, from the perspective of a formulator, unless, in some cases where you don't get data back from your clients. So,
Mhm.
when now you're dealing with a company rather than, an IRB or some kind of a research study where you don't have control over the information that your clients give or don't give. And my
Mhm.
experience is more often than not, they don't give. And so what do it seems like you got your fingers on a really gold mine of data that could
Mhm.
really, you know, be the precursor to maybe a different formula or new or
Mhm.
more formulas or just
Mhm.
learning in general. I mean, anytime you have access to points of data that, you understand pretty well,
Mhm.
that's some golden information there.
Yeah, so it became available earlier this year in early 2024.
Okay,
There's been a lot of people taking it. I have a lot of people giving me feedback. It works. It helps them. Um, a lot of people, it helps them almost immediately with like the fatigue and the brain fog. It's
nice.
helped getting them more functional right away because the long COVID patient population, some of these people are really sick. They have problems functioning. They have problems even getting out of bed and really
Yeah,
working, spending time with their family, like they're suffering. And
right.
what a lot of people are they're giving me the feedback that it helps with the symptoms, helps them make them more functional. I've had people tell me, they can stop taking naps during the day. They actually have the
Nice.
energy to take care of their kids and play with their
Good.
kids. I've had people tell me that it's helped with their dysautonomia, which is one
Wow.
of the more severe symptoms of long COVID. So it seems to really be working well for people. And I am starting to try and look at some of the options because I've had a similar experience where the people with long COVID have been kind of abused by the system. They
Yeah.
haven't got a lot of help. A lot of them are very private because they have suffered so much. They don't
Well,
necessarily want to give a lot of feedback. And
get
I'm
it.
very appreciative of the ones that do. But I,
Yeah.
I also understand the people that are a little more reluctant to talk about their struggle and their health, even
Some
now that
trauma
they're
going on
better.
there. Yeah.
Right? They're better now and they just want to get on with life. And I
I
get
get it.
that. So
Yeah.
I am exploring trying to find some ways to start collecting data more robustly. I'm
Uh-huh.
kind of at the point where I feel like I need to partner with somebody.
Got
I
it.
think it's important for the people to be giving a third party the data and not me.
Hmm.
And I'm trying to figure out ways to actually get that set up and get that to work
Nice.
for people. And that's really, and so my plan, my hope is CircuGuard is really helping people. My hope is to advance that to the point where I can get it enough of the long COVID um, population to know about it, trying it, working for them, and then I've got a couple other additional products for long COVID that are going after some of these other issues with long COVID.
Nice.
Kind of in the R&D phase
All
that I
right.
haven't they're in the design phase. They haven't been
Okay.
produced yet, but that's
Nice.
that's kind of the plan.
Well, that's exciting. Well, so how does somebody, if somebody's interested and they're dealing with long COVID, and
Hmm.
that's the kind of the general point of this whole podcast is there's problems and solutions out there. The more we talk about it, the more somebody's like, oh, wow, that guy's got a solution I haven't thought of or tried. Maybe I can reach out. How does somebody find this product?
So they can go to CircuGuard.com,
Okay.
CircuGuard.com. They can order it there. There's a link there to the full product page, which lays out all the science, all the components, what they're doing, references to the literature. They can also go to KeithCEllisPhD.com. There's a link there to go order CircuGuard. There's a link there to my research Substack, so they can go check out all the information for themselves. There's a link to the social media videos that I made about the science on the Substack, because I know a lot of people with long COVID, they have a hard time focusing and sitting down and reading a lot of long form
You're going
stuff.
to give people a
So,
bunch of research to do. They're like, yeah, right. You go on
right. So I made a bunch of videos and they're on TikTok and YouTube. People can go
Right.
check theirs out. They're much more bite-sized, manageable pieces of the research. And they can join my email list and they can email me from my website, KeithCEllisPhD.com.
Fantastic. Well, Keith, it's been a pleasure. And please stick around for a second once we close this out. I have a few things I want to talk to you about. But thank you for joining us. And it sounds to me like, with this research you're doing, feel free to reach out if you've got more things that you want to share with the audience. And, love to have you be part of this conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I will absolutely come back.
Awesome. Well, this has been another edition of the Healthy Living Podcast brought to you by Willow Creek Springs. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine, and thank you for joining us. This has been another episode of the Healthy Living Podcast. We produce this show so that people can share their stories, people that have overcome obstacles, people that are undergoing obstacles. We're building a community of health-minded individuals. If you're interested in supporting the show, please leave a review on the platform you're listening to it on. If you're interested in becoming a guest, please send an email to itsjoegrumbine@gmail.com, or you can send a note into the notes section of the podcast. All right. Well, thank you for supporting this show, and we hope you've enjoyed it.